A very good evening to you. Welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyom Voko, and on the show tonight...
Honorable Shivambu.
It is your president who kills people.
Honorable Shivambu.
You cannot be addressed by a money launderer, a kidnapper.
You cannot be addressed by Who are you?
EFF MPs deliver on their promise to frustrate President Cyril Ramaphosa's budget vote speech. But what did the chaos that played itself out earlier today in Parliament tells us about the state of politics in South Africa? Our panel weighs in.
Advocate Mkhwebane will remain suspended until the Section 194 process in the National Assembly has been completed.
Well, while President Ramaphosa was part of that chaos in Parliament, his office, in the meantime, was announcing the suspension of the public protector.
This government will always fulfill whatever undertaking.
The minister in the presidency, meanwhile, forced to deal with an outcry after SASSA admitted it withheld social relief of distress grants for April and May. And another report, another horrific picture of the state of the country's municipalities. Is the crisis ever going to end? We get honest reflections from the man who has spent the past 15 years at the helm of the South African Local Government Association. Outgoing SALGA CEO Xolile George is my guest. All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now.
Honorable
It is your president who kills people.
Honorable
You in the ANC every day. You are not killers in the point of order. Saying that you must make the member who says that withdraw that statement. Can you please make one person who says that and the message is very clear today that we cannot be addressed by a money launderer. You cannot be addressed by a criminal. You cannot be addressed by a money launderer, a kidnapper.
You cannot be addressed by Who are you? BBS Shivambu.
You are refusing.
We cannot be addressed by a
We are now throwing you out of the system. Will you please do
But
that?
you can't throw me out for taking the
What is
I'm throwing me out.
people out in the system
Speaker, on a point of order.
Will you please
Speaker.
make sure you remove from Honorable
Speaker, on a point of order.
Thank you,
Honorable Speaker, on a point of order.
Honorable
Speaker.
Okay.
Honorable Speaker, on a point of order.
There is no point of order, Honorable Malema. I'm not allowing
The
you
issue
to
of
speak.
Honorable Shivambu was
You've
ruled
been
on by the
speaking.
court.
Wow. Scenes from Parliament earlier this afternoon, where for more than an hour, proceedings were ground to a halt. Well, I'm joined on the Zoom platform by political analysts Tessa Dooms and Prince Mashele. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time.
Good evening.
Well, one of the things that struck me about, the chaos we saw, which, as I've just said, took more than an hour, was just how ill-prepared it would seem both Parliament and the governing party in particular were, even though the EFF, Tessa Dooms, had actually forewarned everyone to expect what took place today.
Well, in my reading of it, it wasn't so much the speaker that was caught off guard. She seemed to have a very clear game plan, but the governing party certainly didn't have a strategic plan about the ways in which they were going to address or deal with the EFF. I found it particularly bizarre how many ANC MPs on the Zoom platform decided just to, even overtake the speaker in chipping in hurling insults and heckling and all of those kinds of activities, which made things more chaotic more quickly. Quite honestly, it seemed like the ANC caused as much disruption today as the EFF did in terms of the decorum of the House particularly. But one wonders if the ANC just decided to let it play itself out, if it would have given the speaker the opportunity to, on the basis of the kinds of points of order that were called, and clearly the EFF were going to be insulting the president and, saying things that were, accusations at him. She would have been able to fend those off and perhaps settle the matter much quicker than she did with the ANC hurling and heckling the ways they did.
Prince Mashele, from your vantage point?
Look, the chaos, the way it was managed in Parliament, in my view, communicated a message that there is incompetence on the part of the ANC as a caucus, number one, and I'll explain. Number two, there is also incompetence on the part of the speaker. Look, both the ANC and the speaker knew that the EFF would disrupt proceedings. But if you look at how the speaker and the ANC responded, it's as if they were caught by surprise. They had no strategy. Number one, the ANC should have conducted itself in a dignified manner. There was no need for the ANC, members of the ANC to scream. I mean, it was embarrassing to hear them hailing insults at the EFF. They could have behaved in a manner that projected leadership. So you can't differentiate between the chaos of the EFF and the chaos of the ANC. That's number one. Number two, with regard to the speaker, I mean, the EFF have done this over and over again. Why didn't she devise a strategy, for example, to eject the EFF within 10 minutes? I mean, there were members of the EFF from their president to the lowest member. They were all shouting. She could have clinically ejected all of them as a caucus in the beginning, because even their leader, by the way, including Floyd Shivambu, the deputy, made it clear that the party as a whole was not prepared to engage in an orderly parliamentary, to behave orderly. So it was poor the way the speaker managed the whole saga. It was as if she did not know what would happen. There was no need for the whole thing to drag for an hour. So it reflected incompetence on the part of the speaker as well as on the part of the ANC.
In fact, Tessa, and that I share Prince Mashele's sentiment on the speaker, because I think the chaos dragged for far too long. In my view, so you would have thought, having Parliament, having learnt lessons from past experience, would sort of see how that thing, how the EFF conducted itself, and as soon as the old script sort of replayed itself, they would know exactly how to move in and quickly arrest that situation, and that didn't happen. And then secondly, one got a sense that the often vague sort of rules about how you can or when you can interject, and what sort of how much time and how generous the speaker can be or entertaining your interjections, that by now Parliament would be kind of a lot wiser and a lot more efficient in how it manages that.
Yeah, I do think that my only empathy with the speaker is really that she was not only managing for the EFF today, she was also having to manage for the ANC.
I hear you.
And that's the only extent to which I give her any grace in the situation, that I would like to have seen how she would have handled it, and whether she did have a game plan that could have expedited things had the ANC not been as chaotic as they were. But I also think that we need to reckon with the fact that Parliament is going to be a place for contesting politics and contesting people's political agendas. And there also needs to be room for allowing that to play itself out as a part of this process. As a part of the process, the EFF raising the fact that they are not willing to listen to the president for whatever reasons and making political statements is also part of what Parliament does, and how that process isn't meant to necessarily unfold in technical terms, but certainly that's the space for it. I think where it comes to the rules are used extremely loosely, extremely vaguely, and that's where the speaker can be a lot more prepared. She can be more prepared with her tools of and preparing and preempting what the EFF or anybody is going to use in the House, and being able to back that off much more clinically and effectively, as Prince has said on the matter.
And that latter part for me, Tessa, was what I thought would happen this time around, especially given the fact that the EFF had actually forewarned everyone. But I want us to move to the EFF itself. Prince, you think that we're going to see this, happening over and over again? Because after all, it does pay off, certainly from where the EFF is sitting. Okay, since you have lost Prince there. Tessa, what do you think? Do you think we're going to see this EFF script playing itself over and over again for as long as it continues to be a gift that keeps on giving?
100%. The thing is, the EFF are not the only culprits when it comes to the politics of spectacle in South Africa. And so not all parties play it out in the same way, in the same place like Parliament. But I mean, the ANC, it revels in spectacle, in rallies and these shows of force. And in the ways it conducts itself, it really does lend itself to a politics that needs to be theatrical and loud and get eyes and ears on it, rather than a politics that is about substance. And that's become the political culture. Part of the political culture is that our politicians don't need to, and they don't feel like they need to do more than be loud and make spectacles and create PR campaigns, because that's the thing that they think will get them the kind of traction with the media and the kind of traction at least with their base. But that leaves behind the South African public, who rightfully are expecting more from their parliament than theatrics. They're expecting accountability to look more substantive when you're dealing with serious allegations. In fact, what the ATM is proposing is not a bad idea. The idea that Parliament should be able to bring the president in on a special basis to ask him questions about something they deem very, very important. The Ethics Committee should be sitting. There are procedural things and substantive things that can be done in the name of accountability that I think South Africans in the main, as voters and people who are choosing not to vote because they don't like the politics, would appreciate. But now we just see politicians playing to their own interests, the media, and to their bases, and that's not helpful.
One wonders, Prince Michelle, if indeed Parliament was to, as we have been saying, tighten the rules, manage these things a lot better. Do you think they would have an alternative to this strategy, which right now or up until now has actually paid off for them?
No, look, you can't have an orderly parliament if you have disorderly parliamentarians from across the board. It doesn't matter. The rules will not help you. The rules are there, by the way. So the rules of parliament do empower the speaker to eject members of parliament who behave in a disorderly fashion that we have seen. She could have done it earlier, and she can do it much more forcefully to maintain order in parliament. So it's not lack of rules, it's lack of management by the speaker, but it's also lack of political maturity by the governing party. I mean, let's be clear here. The ANC has a majority in parliament. In other words, it is the governing party. It has more responsibilities politically than the EFF to govern. So it must project to South Africa a leadership that inspires hope and confidence. So if you have the governing party that is supposed to provide leadership, exchanging insults with a smaller party that is trying to provoke the governing party, then it means that the governing party is abdicating its responsibility. It doesn't matter how tight to make the rules. If you've got irresponsibility and lack of maturity on the part of the governing party, you can't address the chaos.
Tessa, throughout all of what happened this afternoon, you had the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, sitting there quietly and not getting involved at all. Would you say that was a good strategy for a party that seeks to prove or say to South Africans that we are the next government, we are a government in waiting?
You know, in the context of what was happening today, certainly that was the best thing to do for anyone who wasn't the EFF. I would have expected the ANC to take a similar approach. But like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that the DA doesn't find other places and other ways in which it also participates in the politics of spectacle. We think about just recently the leader of the DA going to Ukraine and doing what seemed to be kind of a media drive that didn't seem to connect with issues that voters and residents and citizens of this country would actually connect with, and saying and doing things that didn't seem like he needed to be there to do it. And so it just brings me back to the point that, you know, you can behave well in one moment and be completely complicit in the same kind of very short, punchy, but really irrelevant kinds of politics. And I think that there is a maturity question here. There's a matter of how do we start doing things not only that look more mature, but are more effective. And we need to find ways of doing that. The litigation route, I know a few years ago, the DA were litigating, so many things. Litigation is one of those things that can be done, but Parliament itself and the ways in which it operates needs to find ways where it becomes more effective. The Zondo Commission really exposed Parliament for letting a lot of things off the hook. And at the same time, that same Parliament was making a lot of noise. And so it's about impact that we're looking for and real mechanisms rather than just staying out of the fray on this one particular day.
Prince, the DA's behavior, stance, attitude, what do you make of it?
Look, there is a temptation in political analysis to try and appear as balanced by condemning everybody, including those who behaved well. I mean, let's be honest. I'm not a supporter of the DA or any other political party, but the DA behaved well today. If you look at that whole chaos and ask who among the political parties was dignified, the DA, in my view, projected a model of political civilization. I would have expected the ANC, by the way, to have behaved the way the DA behaved. But the ANC opted to enter the fray and start hailing insults. So what does it mean to behave parliamentarily? It means that you must behave in a dignified manner. And in my view, today the DA did exactly that. The ANC lost the plot. The EFF, we know that they are hooligans.
Tess, what does the spectacle that played itself out today in Parliament and all the attendant issues, what are they telling us about our body politic and where things are right now?
Yeah, the point that I'm trying to make is that we have a broader issue in terms of our politics and where the level of our politics is at and who politicians see as their audience when they do things that are theatrical, when they do things that are PR driven. And I think what it says is that the citizens and the voters need to be keeping a lot more track of what it is that people are doing in those positions that they've been given power to do, and ask themselves whether people have voted or not. whether or not the people who now represent us, because whether you vote or not, these are our representatives, all of us, are the kinds of people that we want to have in our parliament. Today we had somebody really make a statement that was not only a violent threat, but it was a violent threat with vulgarity in it. And that kind of thing says the kind of politician that we want needs to be something we think about as South Africans as we go into 2024. The kinds of things we want them to be able to do needs to be something we must tell them. These are the ways you need to behave. These are the accountability measures we expect. And these are the ways in which we expect you to project our interests. There needs to be a lot more accountability to the citizens. And I think that will help us a lot more in getting parliamentarians who are not just shooting from the hip or doing things that they think are in their own interest rather than in the interest of the people of the country.
And for you, Prince?
Look, two things that I'm reading out of this chaos. Number one is that the South African population has lost a sense of decency. And I'm bringing in the population into this because those parliamentarians have been voted by us. So when we voted the EFF, the ANC, and all of those people who are causing chaos in parliament, we knew them. It's not as if the population didn't know Malima, didn't know Floyd Chiba. They knew them, but they voted for them. So the South African population must take responsibility in the chaos that is taking place there. Number two, it also tells me that our politicians have completely forgotten what is important for South Africa. The country is not interested in such games. The country is interested in solving major problems that are facing society. Unemployment, the economy as a whole, rising food prices, and so on and so forth. Those are the issues that worry South Africans out there in society. So there is a disconnect between the challenges facing the country and the behavior of our politicians. But as I said, the population, the citizens, we must take responsibility as well because we are the ones who voted these people into power.
Okay, quickly to both of you while I still have you, although even though we have seriously run out of time. What you make of the president's move today? Ultimately, he got to suspend the public protector on the back, of course, of that decision by Parliament to go ahead with that impeachment hearing. Tessa?
I mean, I think it was the logical next step. I think we haven't been in this place before where Parliament has taken this kind of process. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the public protector to necessarily remain in that position while this process takes place. I do hope that the institution is strong enough that the office is able to continue to do its work, as the statement from the presidency alludes to. That remains to be seen, but the institution should be stronger than the individual that's there. And we would hope that this does resolve quite quickly, that the parliamentary process resolves quickly so that we have a public protector and a political lead in that office, as it were, that we all know we've put through the paces and we know that that person is fit for office.
Of course, Prince, I mean, as much as it may make sense to do that, given everything else, it's not going to stop this particular story from taking a life of its own and other people using and abusing it, for their own agendas.
True, but it's a good decision by the president, by the way. I mean, we all know the kind of public protector we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with a person of integrity like Tulima Donse. This public protector, I've said it before, has displayed an unbelievable level of incompetence. I mean, the decisions that she has taken that have been reversed by courts are so many. And she has proven herself to be a factionalist in defense of the RET force of the ANC. So this decision, in my view, it's a good one. It doesn't matter how they use it, those who are aligned to her. But this is actually a good decision. We need to save the integrity of that office. The last point I want to make is this. The president is suspending her so that while she's dealing with the troubles, she can't interfere with the investigations in the office. This also says something about the president because he is being investigated. Why is he not stepping aside himself so that he can't interfere with investigations with regard to Palapala Farm Gate? That's the question.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it for now. Special thanks to both of you, our analyst panel for this evening, Tessa Dooms and Prince Mashele. And of course, a little later on the program, we're going to bring you the outgoing CEO of the South African Local Government Association on the back of another horrific report that paints a really report that paints a horrific picture of the state of the country's municipalities. The question we're going to ask him is whether this crisis is ever going to come to an end. We hope he's going to give us some really honest reflections, not only on what that report, but also on the 15 years, from the 15 years that he has spent at the helm of the South African Local Government Association. But first, we're going to talk to you about an outcry that we are seeing various organizations have come forward after it emerged that SASSA has withheld social relief of distress grants for April and May. We have one of those organizations on standby to talk to us about that. Don't go ahead. Well, we are joined on the Zoom platform once again by Zimbali Mncube. He is a researcher at the Institute of Economic Justice. This, of course, following an outcry by various organizations after it emerged that the social development people have actually not paid the social relief of distress grants for April and May, and we've been trying the whole day to get them to come and explain to us. No one was available. We also understand that there was a meeting this afternoon on this very matter, but we don't know, of course, what transpired there because, as I say, they were not keen to come on. Zimbali, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. And your organization was one of those that sort of shone the light on this problem. What is your understanding of what actually happened?
Good evening, Vuyo. Thank you for having me on the show. Essentially, there has been a miscommunication between government departments. That is at the center of this is the DSD and the Treasury. There's also been a lack of communication between civil society and government, as well as government and the wider public. Essentially, the SRD grant was paid through the National State of Disaster. And when this came to an end, new regulations had to be put in place to enable the SRD to continue to be paid. However, this was not done in time. And as a result, the SRD payments were halted in April. And then we saw that on the 22nd of April, new regulations were released. However, these new regulations came back with the stringent criteria, which essentially decreased the income threshold for people to qualify for this grant from 595 to 350, which we think is ridiculous. Another important thing that didn't take place is that the banks are the only essentially stakeholders that can undertake this means testing that has been put in place. They can verify whether people earn an income that is above or have an income in their bank accounts that is above 350. And essentially, the contracts between government and the banks have been delayed for some reason. And as a result, people have not been paid since April, rather.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, why was this sort of means testing exercise, for lack of a better word, why now does the department have to be, or SASSA, at the mercy of the banks? If they decided on this move, they ought to have known, or at least gone for things that are within their control. Because they can't just, project the blame now and say, it's the banks that are not cooperating with us. It's their job, not the bank's job.
Essentially, that's the issue, and you're absolutely correct, Vuyo. It's the role of the state to essentially deliver basic services, including this grant to people.
And the promise was made that, in fact, this money was indeed going to be paid.
Indeed, both by the President and the Minister of Finance in February. But what informs this decision really is the austerity budget planning that we see in government. We're seeing that basic services and essentially public services are experiencing budget cuts, and including the SRD grant itself. It's been kept to 10.5 million people, and the allocation is 44 billion, and it's been kept to that level, which means that even if there are more than 10.5 million applicants, as they were in May, there were about 15 million people that applied for these grants, which means that there is a need. And we know that.
But is it austerity though, Mbali? Because my understanding is that these people just bungled this thing. It is sheer incompetence. That's what actually happened. And maybe you should take a listen to what the minister in the presidency mumbled this morning when he was asked. I mean, clearly, perhaps in all fairness to him, I mean, he didn't know. I think it was a curved ball. He didn't even know that the issue was going to be asked. But take a listen to what he had to say, which is why I'm arguing that perhaps it's not a question of austerity this time around, but someone just didn't do their job. Take a listen. Okay, we seem to have a problem playing that soundbite by Mondli Gungubel. Okay, let's play. We have it now.
This government will always fulfill whatever undertaking it has in this regard. If there was a period of non-payment, which is unfortunately inconveniencing, I think upfront, if that is there, on behalf of this government, we'll make that apology. But as long as those SRT are due in line with the commitment the President made, they will be paid. That's the general response I can give on that.
Lastly, Bali, have you been able to pick up anything as to what's going to happen next and who's taking this thing seriously and whether they are going to do anything about it and do so sooner rather than later?
Well, the Minister of Social Development presented to the Portfolio Committee of Social Development that the grant will be paid by mid-June. But as civil society, what we are really pushing for is to meet with the presidency and the relevant government departments to take this issue forward and ensure that it is rectified, and whoever that is responsible for this issue and this state of disaster really and a crisis can be held accountable. But people need to be paid. That is the really important issue right now.
Okay, and that's what we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Zimbali Ncube, who is a researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Up next, we'll sit down with the outgoing CEO of the South African Local Government Association. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog, and my next guest is the outgoing CEO of the South African Local Government Association, and that is Xolile George. Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to all your Watchdog listeners.
Congratulations on your appointment as the Secretary to Parliament.
Thank you.
Well, you've spent, more than 15 years, just over 15 years.
It's my 15th year now.
It's my 15th year now at SACA. How has it been?
Well, it's it's an environment that is very challenging. The role itself in particular, being at the helm of municipalities. And as we all know what the role of municipalities is in South Africa, it certainly is one of those complex assignments one must undertake. But over the entire period that we have had this new form of local government as a system, I think there's a fair share of good stories that have touched many lives of South Africans in terms of what municipalities do. But certainly, some of the areas that have been instruments of empowering municipalities, given the benefit of experience now, there is justification for us as a country to start rethinking the system of local government and perhaps revisit some of the assumptions that were central to its own construct. And I think being at the helm of SALGA, one has had a fair appreciation of both the structural nature of some of the challenges that municipalities are beset with, as well as the systemic factors that continue to make local government not to function in a manner that was designed for it in the white paper on local government. And I think if we were to ask a critical question, what needs to be done to improve the system? I think empirical evidence over the last 20 years will point us to areas, no doubt, where certain assumptions have been made, certain legislation may have been passed, certain policies have been passed, but some of them, with that experience, we may perhaps do differently, even from the kind of leadership we need to prevail in that sector, in terms of the executive of municipalities, the mayors, general leadership, as well as council itself, the kind of leadership you need to be able to exercise the kind of leadership and governance and oversight you need to make the system work. And I think that experience has given us a sense that perhaps a call for better leadership at local government would be 10% of the task, but no doubt it will impact 90% of some of the issues that are complex but are not insurmountable.
So are you suggesting that the assumption that was made was that you'd have good, competent, industrious leaders at the helm and things would then fall into place?
Well, Vuyo, if you look at the white paper on local government, it identified 4 characteristics of the kind of system that must be designed. And you needed leadership that would be able to improve its capacity to make sound policy judgments. Now, that's a very serious task, capacity to make sound policy judgments. And to be able to do that, you need to look at the conditions of your local municipality and strive to maximize social and economic conditions, meaning having a very clear economic vision for your own city or town or rural municipality. There's a certain leadership level that you need to be able to appreciate. The second characteristic is about ensuring that you are able to lead a coalition of forces for progress in a municipality, meaning that you don't only look at yourself as council and your administration. Work with a cross-section in society, civil society, organized formations, be they business, be they farmers, and so on. It takes a certain kind of leadership. And you have instances where you would say to a mayor, have you ever met your local chamber of business? Have you ever met your local civil society structures? And probably chances they have never met them. So you need a kind of leadership that would create compacts on the ground where even if you are faced with the most difficult issues for you, you don't have resources. But with the little you have, you need to ensure that every rand you have, first, you can account for it. Secondly, you could leverage, because the third characteristic is to place local government to be at the center of coordinating and integrating the work what other spheres do, because every sphere of government in our design system impacts on local government, and you have a wall-to-wall system. But at the core of what you see every year, Auditor General decrying the state of affairs, the appalling results that year in, year out, you will find them. You also ask yourself, what could be done differently to improve that? The kind of capacity we need. It all rests on capacity to make sound judgments, to implement the laws. If you appoint a CFO, I mean, we have said this several times, appoint a person who knows how to manage funds. Our municipalities have a budget of more than 600 billion rand, combined all municipalities. National government transfers about 133 billion, 84 billion rand for equitable share, and about 52 billion rand for grants. That's just the national transfers. The own local fiscus of a municipality is about 310 billion rand. Now, when you combine all of that, and then you say, here is the city of Johannesburg, 75 billion rand. Probably it will rank 10 or 15 in the biggest companies in the JSE. Now, what kind of CFO you need for that municipality? And even if you were not to take the biggest like Johannesburg, you say 257 municipalities, 110 municipalities have budgets of 600 million up to 1 billion, 110 municipalities. So it means the kind of capacity that you need for people to manage, you need political leadership that will get the right skills, because they can get the right skills in municipalities. But also you have political parties to make sure that the kind of leadership that they send, its people who are also equal to the task. There are improvements, of course. I mean, we've just had elections now on the 1st of November. And when you look at the profile of leadership that is there, there's significant improvement from 2016 as much as it was compared to 2011. The only challenge is to manage the balance between renewal of new leadership and continuity of others. And that's where most of the time, the kind of investment we even make in Salga to train councillors, you are likely to lose 60% of that in the next cycle, or you lose many of them within that first 5 years. So you need a fair appreciation of the complex of the municipality, so that political parties, in their own wisdom, they identify the best capable people amongst them to send to lead local government, because that's where we touch citizens. So when there's problems of water, when there's problem of electricity or sewer running the streets or bad financial management, accountability is very, very important. AG says in the recent report, I have identified a number of municipalities for the last 5 years where action has not been taken on issues that constitute material findings or areas where there's clear transgressions. And you ask yourself, what will it take for us to fix that problem? And it is fixable. It is fixable. But it requires political boldness to act on local government on issues. I can share with you what needs to be done on those areas.
In fact, isn't a big part of the problem the fact that politics has actually moved from bad to worse? I mean, people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. People aren't selecting or appointing people in line with what those people who wrote, the statutes, the vision that they had, their aspirations. It's got nothing to do with that anymore. It's politics of expediency by and large. Now, you are not going to get what is in the book. You're not going to get the caliber, of people who are driven, number one, but also who care about, what and how they do their work. So it's the political system, or am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong, Vuyo. It is also sadly that part, but that's not the only issue.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a number of areas that are structural that needs to be attended to urgently to make sure that local government is able. For instance, on the kind of municipalities we have, we've got different types of municipalities. They may all be called municipalities, but the scale, complexity, and the structural challenges they face, they require a rethink of how they will be funded. Many of our municipalities, year in, year out, you'll find that AG will flag them as going concern factors. If AG says 91% of our municipalities are going concern, you then look at the fiscal aspect of municipalities, how they are funded in terms of grant, how their own local creativity is enabled or disabled to raise revenue in those areas. And some of the laws still today remain unreviewed. For instance, the Property Rates Amendment Act that allows municipalities to raise revenue. The white paper on local government projects that 17% of property rates must be funded from an area where there is a jurisdiction. So if you are a Ndwedwe municipality, but you can only raise revenue from 10% of your community, how does our fiscus compensate for that structural limitation? Or even in areas where you find that the land tenure system will just disable a municipality, regardless of whether you say we will have a special land use management ex-pluma to rethink the land use system, but those constraining factors are there. You also have areas structurally where you have coexistence of municipalities in terms of electricity function with ESCOM, and you can't implement your credit control measures in areas where it is ESCOM controlled, because you need your credit control instrument to cut off power but not cut water to people. But in areas where ESCOM has got jurisdiction, you are unable, and that constitutes 40% of your space as municipalities, where you have no instrument to exercise your constitutional function. So we are engaging over this period, Vuyo, to try and unravel this to make sure that it is addressed around those areas. But you also have the areas that I'm saying from accountability and consequence management. We need to make sure that there's bold political action that is taken when you have municipal leaders. Editor General says, in your municipality, I've got 64 officials whose hands are on the till in the supply chain. Act on them. But when you don't have an audit committee where the mayoral committee is going to say to audit committee, please ask the name of those 68 officials, give them to the municipal manager. In the next month, give us a report that says what action has been taken around these matters. Do we have municipalities that act on that? Yes. But sadly, the majority of them, SALGA will write to municipalities and say, let us extract consequence and accountability around this matter. Please act on this area. And in many municipalities, they would not respond. So we are hopeful that the new councillors...
And you have no way of whipping them into line.
You have no way. But on the other side, we look at AG report. AG will then say, I've got 10 municipalities I've just sampled out. And these 10 municipalities, year in, year out, this is the 10 billion rand allocated from the national fiscus. This is their own budget. When I audit from the start of the opening balance to the end, the cash available, I cannot reconcile these two things. It has happened last year. It has happened last year. Of course, we do have good stories. 81 municipalities consistently have received unqualified audits for the last period. How do we build on that nucleus? On the one hand, we must be able to say what instruments we can use. For instance, Vuyo, National Treasury transfers money. National Department of Corporate Governance transfers money. It's grants for infrastructure or equitable share. I would be concerned as an accounting officer who has a duty to transfer in terms of the Division of Revenue Act to a municipality that evidently for the last 5 years receives this money, is unable to account. What responsibility do I have to extract accountability and not transfer the money? So that we make the system to self-correct. And I think it requires that kind of boldness to me to say, regardless of the noise that can come, we must be able to say we cannot justify in our own fiduciary responsibility to transfer money to an entity that knowingly we know the money is going to start here when we come and audit. So that you can be able to say, I don't have CFO. How do we help you to have a CFO? And the CFO must be able to do ABC.
Interesting you're saying that was right now. I mean, the Minister of Finance was in Parliament. KZ Etegwini, for instance, is crying foul because the money that was meant for disaster relief hasn't come. Treasury says, but we can't just throw money at you. You need to tell us what this money is for, who's going to account for it, and so on and so forth. You have a form to fill that details the things that you need to do before we can actually give you money. Why are other accounting officers unable, to do that? Because increasingly over the years, one has also seen is like scapegoating of Treasury. No, we can't do this because Treasury didn't give us the money.
Yeah.
So why is it difficult?
I don't know, Vuyo. I mean, Section 37J of the PFMA says to any accounting officer, before you transfer money to any other entity, satisfy yourself that the receiving entity, whether it's another national department or whatever, has sufficient control systems that would make it account effectively and transparently on that. Now, I'm saying we must be able to reach a stage where we say, out of this picture we are seeing for the last 5 years, there are these problems that are political in many municipalities, but there are also these weaknesses that are preventable and avoidable. We need to have a CFO that can manage this fund. So at the end of the day, we don't have 700 million rand that is irregular. So structural issue is to say, can we recruit the right people? Where there are limitations, for instance, the appointment of suitable qualified people, the market is very aggressive. How do we make sure that we rethink even how we compensate officials so that we can attract the right caliber of people? But at the core of what I'm saying, consequence and accountability at a political level as well as at mid-level will give us 90% of the shift in the system. And I think it's high time that those who have got authority and instruments to enforce that, it must be enforced. Otherwise, the picture remains deteriorating.
And that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. Special thanks to Xolile George, who is the outgoing CEO of the South African Local Government Association on matters local government. Of course, we are going to have these conversations next week, even told the report of the Auditor General will be coming out and we'll be having these discussions again. For tonight, though, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for watching. Join us again tomorrow night, same time.